Hello, welcome back to the Dreamers podcast. I'm your host, Anne-Lyse Wealth, and today I am joined by Nii and Renée Darko. They are a couple of physicians. They paid off close to $700,000 in student loan debt in 3 years. They are also entrepreneurs, so they are really the definition of doing things outside of the box. And I can't wait for you guys to hear their story. Renée and Nii, welcome to the Dreamers podcast.
Thank you. Thank
Hey.
you so much, Anne-Lyse.
We're excited to be here.
Can you tell the listeners or whomever may be watching a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay, so yes, we are Renée and Nii Darko, and we are a physician couple. And we met shortly before going into medical school. We actually met over the phone and then eventually met in medical school in Kansas City, Missouri. I'm from Brooklyn. My husband grew up in Queens and then grew up in New Jersey, kind of half and half of his childhood. And my husband started actually a podcast called Docs Outside the Box, which we currently host together. And we've just had a lot of fun doing that. But I'm sure we'll get into more of our story. But as you mentioned, we did pay off close to $700,000 worth of student loan debt. But we're very excited to be on your show today.
Well, I'm very excited to have you guys, as I first heard about your story on the So Many podcast. And I've definitely never had on the show, or not yet, anyone who has paid off that much debt, and especially in 3 years. And how did you guys accumulate the debt?
Oh, for me, it was a combination. So I graduated with about $25,000 after 4 years of college, and then quickly took that out in an entire year for medical school. And then I also got an MBA while in medical school. So by the time I finished medical school, that was $242,000 of student loan debt. And then afterwards, after you finish medical school, then I decided to do general surgery training and a training specifically in trauma. So that was an additional 6 years past medical school where I'm working, but we're making like $35,000 to $40,000 a year. But that student loan debt, we weren't really making a dent in. And actually, what I found out is at the end of those total of about 11 years, I had about $330,000 of student loan debt. So it had ballooned during my training time in residency and fellowship.
Yeah. And so pretty much my story is almost identical. Accumulated debt in college, then went to medical school, went to residency training. I'm an OBGYN. And essentially, part of why it had ballooned so much after medical school was because we were deferring, forbearing, the interest is accruing, the balance is not being paid. And eventually we ended up getting married about 10 years after we originally met. And when we finally sat down and said, okay, we should probably start looking at our finances, we realized that we both had upwards of $330,000 each. So we ended up as the couple having $662,000 worth of student loan debt.
I think that the thing that's interesting about that is we had no clue that we graduated with $240,000. Like we knew, but we didn't know, if you know what I mean. And anybody who is kind of going through this and listening to this, they know like you kind of just have your sights set on graduating and getting your degree or getting the job that you want. And if you come from a certain background, you're just signing papers really to kind of get through. But your school may or may not have an exit interview. If you do go through the exit interview, you're not really paying attention because you're just, either way, whatever number you send me, I can't do anything about it anyway. And that's kind of how we were. Once we left, we were just like, all right, well, I have 240.
Yeah.
And we had no idea, though, that an additional $90,000, $100,000
Right.
of interest would just accrue so quickly in 6, 7 years. So we really felt like we were really behind the 8 ball. We were broke. It was really difficult for a 2-physician household like us to be like, wait, this is not consumer debt, right? This is
Right.
not us buying Jordans and she buying whatever the equivalent would be. This is not, I have a fancy car. We had nothing really to show for it except for our degrees. And that was it.
You've made a great point. When you go off to college, most of us don't have the education. So we are really just signing the paperwork and then have to deal with the consequences later. But I'm curious to hear, though, when you guys first had that conversation and you realized that together you had over $600,000 of debt, how was that?
Well, I first realized I had $330,000 of debt And then she convinced me. She was like, well, actually, we have 600. I'm like, we mean we. I have 300 something in debt. You have 300 something in debt. And then I quickly got schooled to the us with our finances. And then that's how I started to grasp. I was like, oh, we have almost $700,000 in student loan debt.
Yeah.
Okay, I see how it is.
Yeah. I mean, but for me, that was important to be able to combine our finances. I know, different couples do it different ways, but we actually combine our finances. I figured if I'm going to build a life with a person, then part of that life is going to include the resources that we have together. Mm-hmm. And so we can't build resources together if we are doing everything apart. So we tackle the debt basically in a way such that we didn't necessarily divide and conquer, but we actually pooled our resources together. And I think being on the same page financially helped us actually tackle the debt in a much quicker time frame than we originally had planned.
So you guys both have MBAs and MDs, right?
Yeah. Well, we're DOs, so Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine.
So I guess going to medical school and doing the residency, that wasn't enough. You wanted to go to school some more.
It's never enough.
Alphabet soup.
Did you always know that you were going to do things outside of medicine? Was that the plan from the beginning or no?
No. Well, at least for me, I didn't.
Yeah, me either.
I got my MBA because I just thought that after I finished my training, I was going to open up a practice. And if I get an office manager and I hire someone to take care of the finances, I just wanted to know what that stuff really meant. That was it. Mm-hmm. But halfway through our MBA, that's when Medicare Part D came out under the Bush administration. And there was a lot of health policy discussions that we were having. And although we were learning all the stuff that most MBA people would learn, all the basic stuff, I found myself, and she found herself really fascinated by policy. And I think also for me, I really found myself understanding that, I thought that I was this big person who was in the center of the healthcare system. And I'm really this small little, almost like a cog in a wheel of this entire complex. And that was really a stark understanding while in medical school, while getting this MBA of where I fit. And that kind of started me on this road of, okay, how is it that I can kind of just flap my wings and do things a little differently? Or the reason of why I wanted to go into medical school while I was in medical school was starting to kind of clip. What I'm expecting is not going to be how I am going to end up. So I need to do something differently. So that was like the beginning of all of that.
Yeah. I mean, it was the same with me. Like he said, I got so interested in policy that actually at the last 2 months of medical school, I was able to do a health policy rotation. So I spent 2 months out in Washington, D.C. When I graduated, again, I did OBGYN residency, but after my residency, I actually went out to Atlanta at the Morehouse School of Medicine, and I did a health policy fellowship out there. And so same thing, you start to realize, doctors don't actually run the healthcare system. They're just the worker bees, and so you realize that, well, you have some options in terms of how you want to fit into the healthcare system. And it just started to look, like he said, very different for me when I was pre-med to now, where I had graduated and realized the healthcare system, the way that a doctor fits into the healthcare system isn't actually what I thought.
So prior to making the decision to aggressively go after your student loan debt, what were your monthly payments like?
What monthly payments?
You
have to pay monthly payments in order to have monthly payments.
Well, I leave it to you like this. When I got out of deferment, the payment that they wanted, it was just something exorbitant that I couldn't afford. And that's when I said, okay, can I defer? And they said, no. I was like, what do I do next to get you from calling me? Because I got to go to a case, or there's this things that I got to do to kind of finish residency. And they said, you can forbear. And I was like, well, what's that? And they explained it to me, and I still didn't really understand. All I knew is that they were going to stop calling me. So I just forbeared. And I did that for the next 5 years. And then once we finished and we started getting our paycheck, we get a coupon book that shows how much of the payments we should be making. So we started making the payments, and then we start realizing that literally, if you look at the payment, 90% of it was going to interest and the rest would go to principal. But also at the same time, our principal wasn't decreasing much at all. So that really was like, something is going on with this payment. And we put into a calculator and we kind of started following what the standard payment options would be based off of what Sally Mae and Navient and Nelnet was saying. So we would put into a calculator what our total loan was. We put in what all of our interest rates were. And it said if we followed their payment plan, which would be what, at the end of 20 years, we'd owe like $1.2 million, or we would have ended up paying $1.2 million.
Yeah.
And we're just like, wait,
and I
what?
was like, I'm not paying $1.2 million for tuition. That's
Crazy.
out of like that. Yeah, it's done, right? Because at that point, I kind of liken it to a carton of milk. If you pay interest on a carton of milk that you've already drunk, you know what I mean? How much more are you getting out of that carton of milk? So we had already finished our education. We were practicing already. There's nothing more that we were going to get out of the universities that we attended. So why are we paying so much interest? And for me, that was a huge pain point. I just felt like I'm paying $1.2 million of tuition for a school that I had not been to in like 20, 30 years at the end of the payment plan. And for me, it just was a waste of money. And so that's when we decided, nope, we got to go to work. And we literally went to work.
Well, even prior to that, the big inflection point was we realized that we were paying a little too much for insurances. So we were paying a lot for disability insurance, especially Renee being a woman. The rates are a little bit higher for women, or way higher for women than for men. We were paying into a whole life insurance plan that really wasn't designed in our favor. I'll just leave it to you like that. It wasn't designed in our favor. We weren't being really good stewards with our money. Once again, we weren't spending a lot like on consumer things, but we weren't being intentional with the money. So it came to a point where we started looking at our budget, so to speak. We didn't really have a budget back then. And we realized that literally we were only making minimum payments to our student loans. And we talked to the person who arranged or made the arrangements for our whole life plan. And we said, look, something needs to change. And also at the same time, this is us talking to him. You haven't really met with us to discuss, now that we are married, like changing beneficiaries. Do we need a better plan? Do we need nothing? It was just dead silent. So his answer back to us after we told him why we would like to get rid of our whole life or decrease it is, you guys need to budget better. Right. And we were really frustrated about that. We didn't like that answer. But in the whole scheme of things, he was actually right. So what we ended up doing is we went back and looked at all the income that was coming in. And then we also combined that and looked at it with all of the expenses that were coming out. And we just said, you know what? It's time to budget whole life out of our life. So we budgeted him out and we budgeted that plan out. And we became really, really intentional. It was a very spirited discussion that we had as to how we're going to pay for debt. And the other thing too also is it wasn't just student loan debt. I'm telling you, she had some debt that she owed to the IRS. I had a townhome condo that was $170,000 that I was paying a mortgage on,
which was now worth $50,000.
No, at one point. Bubble. At one point, it was worth $50,000.
Right, at one point,
it's back up to like 120 at that point. Either way, I had a mortgage for 170. So we're talking about being almost close to almost $900,000 just in debt. And we don't own a home. We don't have a fancy car. Right. So this was a very, very interesting, stark, jarring time for us.
Yeah. And people think that, well, you're physicians, you're going to make a whole bunch of money. And it's like, yeah, but we were broke. If you looked at our net worth, we were literally in the negative. I mean, there was no way that we were making $900,000 between the income that we both had. So we were actually broke. And that really just pushed us to, again, be more intentional with our money, actually start budgeting instead of doing this mental math in our heads. It's hard to do mental math between two people, right? You might be able to get away with it on your own, but if he's swiping his card and I'm swiping my card and we're on different ends of town, then whatever math I'm doing in my head is always going to be incorrect. And so we just got really intentional and started figuring out what our priorities were. And that's when we figured out that our first priority was going to be to pay off debt.
Or even before that, our first priority was getting an emergency savings.
Yeah.
We didn't even have emergency savings.
Right. Right.
Remember back then when on that 20-year plan, how much you would be paying every month for 20 years?
It was like $2,000 for me and $2,000 for you or something like that. Or maybe a little bit less than that.
And you know what's really funny is that when I was in residency, I actually remember the payment being about $800, about like between $800 and $1,000. But because it had ballooned up so much, now my payment was even higher than that, pretty much double or more.
And for the record, that number that we're telling you was just for federal loans. We had a private loans each.
Yeah, we
That
each
was
had private
mainly
loans.
how we got our
MBAs.
MBAs. And that was in addition to the $2,000. So we're talking about close to like $2,500, $2,600 each, which if we were really focusing all of our money or our income towards paying off that debt, it'd be no problem. But if you try to keep up with the Joneses, you get a house that maybe we shouldn't be affording at this moment, or we get a car that we shouldn't be affording at maybe at this moment. Then we try to go on vacation. Then we try to help our parents. Then we try to do all these different things. After a while, you're like, wait, there is no money to save.
Right.
There is no money to invest. You have all these things, but you can't really build wealth with that.
So back then, do you mind sharing what your income was at the time?
My income, oh gosh, do I remember? What was my income?
I was $350,000.
Yeah.
And then I also would do extra work, temporary work. I was employed at my hospital, and then I would do additional work. And then she was part-time.
Yeah, I was part-time. So
you were less than 200, I think.
Yeah, mine was maybe, I'm thinking about 185 at the time, 185, maybe 190 at the time. So we're not even halfway to what we owe. And that's gross, not net.
Yeah. I think, a lot of times we focus on the income, right? How much is coming in, not necessarily all of the other responsibility that you have or expenses that you have. In your case, student loans. And it's so great that you guys actually took the time to look at, okay, if we keep at this pace, this is how much we're going to end up paying off. So let's just tackle this as soon as possible. So in addition to budgeting, can you maybe share some of the things that you guys had to do to be able to pay off your debt in such a short amount of time?
Oh, the biggest thing was setting up an Excel spreadsheet. This was really simple. We just did an Excel spreadsheet. She set it up where on one side it had what our income was. And then on the other side, it had what our expenditures were. And we did that for 3 months. We didn't make any changes to our budget or anything like that. We didn't even create a budget. That really helped us to understand where all of our money was going. And we found out that we were spending a significant amount of money of buying food at the cafeteria in the hospital. And we were still buying perishables at the grocery. So then we started thinking to ourselves, well, if we're spending this amount of money for fast food or at the cafeteria, then why are we spending so much money at the cafeteria? Or excuse me, at the grocery store. So we had to make a decision. So what we decided to do after knowing some of these numbers, like spending money here and there, but the biggest change was how we ate. And that had a big effect on our health. And we decided that we were going to start with $200 a month on groceries and only $50 each for food at the hospital. Because when I'm on call for 24 hours. And that's consistently for a week, 24 hours on, 24 hours off. So yes, I could bring in a lunch. But also at the same time, I needed something just in case, some extra cash to hold me. So now we're talking about $300 that we're spending for food for an entire month when we were probably spending close to like 900.
Maybe 900.
Yeah.
One of the most important things we did between the two of us is we made a pact not to create any more debt. So no credit cards, no lines of credit, no nothing. Do not create any more debt. And I think that was really important, because it helped us to solidify that we were on the same page and that we were working towards the same goal. It made us committed, not just to each other, but to this life that we were trying to build together. So that for us was really important. One of the other things that we did was we did extra work. He was talking about it. He was 24 hours on, 24 hours off. He would do that for 2 weeks at a time. And then he would be off for 2 weeks. So during those 2 weeks that he was off, he would go and he would work at another hospital. And then for me, when I was off, I was part-time. What that meant was a lot of times I had about 4 or 5 days of no work. And so I would use that time to go work at another hospital. That's what we did. Working at those other hospitals, we just threw that income right at the debt to be able to pay it off as quickly as possible. And then one of the other things that we did was we calculated, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, Nee, but we calculated, well, I calculated at one point with Sally Mae. I called Sally Mae, I should say. And I asked them, if we wanted to pay this debt off in 5 years, what would our minimum payment be? If we wanted to pay it off in 3 years, what would it be? If we wanted to pay it in 1 year, what would our minimum payment be? And so once we had figured out our budget, this is maybe about 6-7 months into it. Once we had figured out our budget and potentially having excess to be able to throw at the debt, when I called Sally Mae and asked them what our minimum payments would be if we paid this off in a shorter, much shorter time frame, I went back to the budget and I said, you know what? We could pay this off in 5 years. We could pay it off in 5 years. And then I came back to him and said, we could pay it off in 3.
And I was like, I don't believe it.
He didn't believe me.
Like, no way.
He didn't believe me. He was like, there's no way. I'm like, yeah, we can. The numbers are here. If we stick to this plan, we could be done in 3 years. And he fought me on it, but we ended up paying off the $662,000 in what, 3.5 years?
I think it was sooner than that. No, it was right
like
at 3. It was right at 3 years.
Yeah, it was about 3 years.
Right under 3 years, actually, because we
That's
finished
amazing.
January 2017.
No, we finished December.
So right under 3 years.
December 2017.
Yeah, because we started February 2014.
Is that when we said? Yeah. It's been a while now.
And you guys are both physicians. You also have a few businesses. You obviously have high paying, demanding career. What made you want to do more work outside of your career?
We just realized that we were high paid employees, basically. And that was not why I became a doctor. And there was some decisions, autonomy issues that I just was like, this is not what I expected when I was taking a bus to college and taking a bus and dreaming about becoming a doctor. And I started off working when I finished training. I did something that's called locum tenens, which is independent contracting. And I did that for about 1.5 years. And when you work like that, you actually dictate to a hospital when you can work, how much you want to work for. And we're talking about like, I'm not working any holidays, or I want to get paid this amount of money. It's a negotiation, but you feel like you're in a lot of control. So I did that for about 1.5 years prior to us getting married. Then when we got married, that's when I took my first employed job. And working with my colleagues was okay, but a lot of the things that I enjoyed working on my own were gone. If I wanted to have a vacation, I had to check with my colleagues. If I wanted to just do certain other things, I was like, what is this? Until it finally clicked. I was like, oh, I'm an employee. That's the issue. And I started thinking, I was like, okay, well, we're trying to pay off all this student loan debt. I don't know if there's anybody from our perspective, a 2-physician household, a 2-physician Black couple household, a 2-physician Black immigrant household perspective. I was like, let's start a podcast where I'm just interviewing interesting doctors who are doing really interesting things. And then she started convincing me to like start throwing in more and more about what we're going through with our finances, what we're going through with our aspirations. And the podcast just kind of grew from there. And then also at the same time, we just started to realize that who says that we just can't continue to work on our own and work as independent contractors and not be employed by a hospital? We do everything the same. She delivers babies the same way employed as she does not employed. And same thing with me. I take out spleens the same way. It's just that we enjoy our autonomy better. We enjoy being on our own better. So that's why we've kind of done this type of lifestyle. It allows us to kind of just keep that dream of why we wanted to be a doctor, that autonomy. It keeps it going for us.
So what are some of the other things that you do, the other businesses?
My business is what they call pre-med strategies, and it's evolved over the years. I actually now have an app called MedEc, which stands for Medical Education Equity. And it's an app where I help underrepresented students in medicine, pre-med students, to essentially interface with medical school recruiters so that they can get the information that they need, the access that they need, literally from the source's mouth. We know that in medicine, there's a lot of issues in terms of lack of diversity, and there are lots of different reasons for that. And so one of the reasons that I wanted to tackle was to be able to get access and information to the students who need it the most, but normally don't get it. So that's the second business that we have.
But just real quick, she doesn't really describe it well, but basically for people who are listening, imagine going to a job fair, but you, instead of going to a job fair in person, you're doing a job fair over the phone, right? Like you're interviewing with someone on the phone. They are doing education on the app. It's like Instagram. It's really an amazing opportunity to give a lot of people who would not be able to go to some of these conferences. They have to pay for a flight. They have to pay for a taxi. They have to pay for a hotel. You can do all of that through your phone, which is an extremely novel idea. So I give her mad props for that.
Thank you.
Amazing. And so you said you had another business or more?
Yeah. So, well, he kind of described the business in and of itself. So we talked about the podcast, we talked about my app, but the other business is actually the locum tenens business, the independent contracting business. We essentially, as doctors, we work for ourselves. And when you heard us on So Money, I think at that point we had not started, no, we had started that business, but it had evolved at one point into kind of an agency for other doctors to go through. And so we did that business for about 3.5 years, had a contract with a hospital. It was actually a very lucrative business. We did it for 3.5 years. And when that contract ended with that hospital, we decided we had a decision to make. Do we want to continue to pursue more contracts with hospitals for other doctors to rotate through? Or did we want to now pursue a business? Because at this point, now we had children. Do we want to pursue a business that potentially we might be able to pass on to our children? And so we decided to continue the independent contracting between the two of us, but not necessarily do the agency. And we actually decided that we would go into real estate. We are literally just dipping our toe into real estate right now, but we have really big aspirations. We actually just bought a multi-unit complex back during the pandemic in 2020. So that was our first venture into real estate. So we're hoping to go even further with that. But yeah, I guess that's technically 4 businesses at this point.
So you are juggling 4 businesses, you have kids, so you're parents. For a lot of people, it's hard to even just have one job and think about doing something on the side. Can you share how you're managing all these different activities and things that you do?
Speaking of kids, one of the things that I think might be really interesting is that we first, remember I said we decided that we were not going to create any more debt. And so even in juggling the things that we were doing before, having kids, trying to have kids was a juggle in and of itself. And so we ended up doing IVF because we had trouble having children. And so we decided that we were not going to create any more debt with that. And that's not something that insurance just covers. So once we decided that we were going to do IVF, we decided it was going to be paid out of pocket while we were still in the throes of paying off our student loan debt. So we were maybe about a year into our paying off our student loan debt, or even less than that, paying off our student loan debt when we started down the road of infertility treatment. And so all of that independent contracting that we did on the side of our permanent jobs was going towards that. So even that in and of itself was a juggle because we had to juggle our work. I had to juggle my schedule with getting the injections, getting all of the surveillance that we needed to do. I had to drive 4 hours to and from the IVF center. So that's where the juggle actually started. Both our children came without IVF, but that's a different story. I'm not bitter. That was a lot of money. That's a lot of money. But anyway, both of our children obviously have now come. And so what we've decided was that since we kind of arranged our lives in such a way where we live very minimally, we don't spend a lot of money, and we don't really have much debt. I stay home most of the time with the children. And then my husband still does independent contracting. We kind of both do still independent contracting. But because we are able to dictate what our schedules are, then I stay home. I only work 1 weekend a month. And then he only works you're like up to 10 days a month, maybe. So 10 days a month. So we get to spend a lot of time with each other, with our family, with the kids. It's a time that I think for us is really important because as children grow, they leave the nest. And so we just didn't want to fall into that trap of, well, I'm going to work now when my children are young, and then I'll enjoy them later, and then realize, wait, they leave the nest later. They're not actually here. So we're enjoying them now.
So you guys are spending a lot of time together, even working together. Do you have any advice for people who work with their spouse or partner on how to make it work?
Don't kill him. You'll need him. Don't kill him.
Hey, yo. So the most important thing is that we dream together. and that we have the same type of goals. We have the same type of dreams, wishes, and wants in our life. That being said, we're two different people and we work two different ways. So we have to learn. I think we've learned to kind of just let each other do their thing. And then we meet in the middle and decide to make the magic occur. Right. So with the podcast, I'm more of I come up with the ideas for the episodes. I come up with the topics for the episodes. I come up with the equipment. I set up all those different things, but I'm not really good at the business aspect of the podcast, like how to get sponsors and how to do contracts. And to be really honest, like how to be very direct with sponsors and things like that. So that's where she does really good. That's where she excels. So she's the actual business manager of the podcast. And that took a while for me to kind of realize that, you know what, I think I need to do that in order to let this whole business grow. So I think for anybody who's listening and they would like to work with their spouse, I think the big thing is, what are your dreams? What are your wishes? Are they the same? If that's the case, then that's already an amazing start. The next thing is just realizing that not very often that two people are going to work the same way. They're going to do things the same exact way and follow each other's work ethic, or not even work ethic, but just work pattern. That's very rare for that to occur. But the key thing is just to recognize the strengths of each other and to really maximize that. And I think whether it's her business or it's my business or the business that we run together, always bouncing ideas and working together in a way where I feel like she's going to have the most buy-in because I'm playing to her strengths. And the same thing with me. She'll ask me questions in ways in which she knows that I'm very interested and so forth. And it works. It really works. Do we have our arguments, or do we have time where we have to be like, you know what, you're going to have to do your own thing and then I'll do my own thing? Absolutely. But ultimately, we come back together and we know that, okay, look, we have to get task A through C done in order for us to meet this obligation. Let's get it done. Yeah. And we get it done.
I often say, even with money, right, in terms of putting your money together, part of the reason that for me, it wasn't an option to go separate finances.
Oh, I wanted a prenup also.
Whatever, Nee.
Remember?
Barely. You had nothing, Nee. What were you going to prenup? You're going to prenup my debt? Okay, fine. You'd be paying $330,000 by yourself.
Would have got there faster.
Get out of here. But it's like I say, right? You have to trust the person that you're marrying, right? If you don't trust that person, you probably shouldn't be marrying them. Trust your spouse. If you can trust them enough to close your eyes at night and have them lay next to you, to raise children with them, leave your children with them when you're at work or wherever, then you should trust them enough with, one, your finances, and two, whatever dream you're trying to build. Always know that the intention is always good, even if the path is a disagreeable one, if it conflicts. So we may not agree on how to do something, but always remember that the intention is the same, to be able to grow together, to be able to succeed and achieve and leave something for our children. That's something that we share very much in common, is that we want to leave something to our children. And so I think that once you figure that out, once you figure out that your intentions are good and the intentions of your spouse are good, then even if you argue, even if you bump heads, you still have this ground level understanding that this person is not trying to actually hurt me. And I think sometimes
is that what people,
no, I don't think that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be working with you. And I wouldn't have married you.
I love that. I love that. So you guys have been able to basically start in a very high demanding career that you didn't own your time, and you've been able to figure out how to reclaim your time. So for anyone who is listening or watching that is interested in designing the lifestyle that they want to live, what kind of advice do you have for them?
I would definitely say that I think for someone like me, who I didn't have anybody in my family who wanted to be a physician, and there were some really strong reasons why I wanted to become a physician. And once I got to that point, I realized that there's some realisms that I just have to accept about medicine and healthcare. I think I realized that the most important asset that I had wasn't actually money. It wasn't actually how much cash I could stash. It was my time. And when I realized that that was my greatest asset that I had, I really, just like what you said, we were figuring out ways that we can buy our time back, because it's really, really important to us. And even if that means not having all the extravagancies that people associate with certain lifestyles or certain professions, that was okay with us. The ability for us to know that we can purchase certain things, but just know that we don't need that is just good enough for us. And I think we just take pride in, or at least I take pride in knowing that my kids one day will be able to take a lot of the risks that I wasn't able to take when I was in my teenage years or even in my 20s and 30s, because I had to do the safe thing, which was become a physician. So we're hoping that actually we are able to buy our time back, but also at the same time lay the seed work, lay the groundwork for our kids who are going to be able to take some really big chances with business, entrepreneurship, and whatever things that they may be interested as the next generation.
Yeah.
That is beautiful. I think that's what you call living outside of the box. I always end the podcast interview with a round of rapid fire questions. So can you tell me about a book that changed your perspective on life?
Mine was Rich Dad, Poor Dad, for sure. I think the biggest thing for me in that book was once I realized what debt was actually for, it started to change just kind of how I viewed money and how it works.
For me, it's Atomic Habits by James Clear. Just the understanding of how to build small little habits and how to improve your life. It doesn't have to be a monumental shift, but just by changing your life 1% a day, you can have a significant change in your life over time. That was really, really big for me.
What's one life lesson you learned the hard way?
Ooh, that's a good question. What's one life lesson I learned the hard way?
Time is the greatest asset for me. That was the hardest lesson I learned.
Yeah.
You don't get that time back.
Don't ever punch through a door unless you know if it's glass or not.
When did you learn that lesson?
When I kicked the glass door thinking it was wood, but it wasn't.
Really? When was this?
I was 9. No, the hardest lesson I think that I learned was that people want to know what's in it for them. People don't always just do things out of the kindness of their hearts. They do it because they have their own motives. They have their own notions in mind, their own goals in mind. So if you ever approach someone with something, expect that they are going to pretty much ask, whether outright or in their heads, what's in it for them.
What's one thing you wish you could tell your younger self?
If I had to tell my younger self something, I would say, keep going. I think I was a kid who, even though I had kind of traditional goals, my dad always says this. He's like, oh, you always had these crazy ideas in your head. I would always tell my dad about these crazy ideas in my head. And then next, somebody would do the idea. Like, remember you could only lick stamps?
Yeah.
And I used to say to my dad, why do we have to lick stamps? Why can't it just be a sticker? I used to say this to him when I think I was maybe about 5. And I would say, why can't the stamp be a sticker? And why can't the envelope just be a sticker? And next, they started making stickers. He's like, I can't believe you told me this at 5. I'm like, okay. I didn't think it was crazy, but apparently it was. So I would tell myself, keep going. You're on the right track. What about you?
Oh,
yeah.
Easy. I tell myself not to buy that damn house I bought. That townhome in Atlanta for 175. Like, don't do it, Nee. Don't do it. You seen those TikToks where they have someone like, no,
Right.
no. That'd be me signing
the back
mortgage
in 2006
and the closing documents on this house that I had no money to put down. I would have told myself not to get that.
right before the bubble.
Yeah.
What's the best investment in yourself you've made so far?
So the best investment I've made in myself, I would actually go back and say it was going to medical school. It was. Because if I didn't go to medical school, I wouldn't have met this guy. I wouldn't have the kids that I have. We wouldn't be building this life. That ballooned payment of $330,000 on my end, it was well worth it. I'd pay it all again to be where I am today. For me, that's the best investment.
The best investment that I made was deciding to pay off the student loans, because that actually put our lives in a different trajectory. That forced us to take a look at our finances in ways that just wasn't prepared to look at, forced us to consider businesses that I definitely wasn't thinking about doing prior to how much debt we were in. It forced me to make a lot of different big boy decisions that I just wasn't prepared to do. And I kind of feel like once we decided to pay off our student loans, that started the second act of our career. Mm-hmm. And I feel like our career, at least for me, I feel like my career was going in one trajectory, and then once we did something, it was like a hard left. And now I'm in a different phase of my life and career. And I really, really enjoy this portion of my life better than how it was while in residency and so forth. So that's the best one for me.
Filling the blank in 3 words or less. Money to me is?
Oh, it's easy. A tool in 3 words or less?
Yes.
Oh, a tool.
The ultimate resource.
What do you want your legacy to be?
My children. Just hands down, I want it to be my children, my family extended. Like, I want my great, 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 great grandson to be able to look back and know that he came from a hardworking family. He came from a family that was very intentional with their resources. He came from a family that is going to do good in the world, that is going to really understand the plight of people who might not have as much. That's what I want my legacy to be.
Yeah, same thoughts.
So Dr. Nii and Dr. Renee, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Please tell the dreamers where they can find you if they want to learn more about amazing things that you guys are doing.
So thank you so much, Anne-Lyse, for having us on the show. We really enjoyed it. If you want to follow Docs Outside the Box podcast, you can actually check out Dr. Nii's Instagram at Dr. Nii Darko, and it's DRNII DARKO. If you or your children are aspiring to go to medical school, you can follow me on Instagram at Dr. Renee Darko. That's DRRENEE DARKO.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.